right. Welcome to EVA. My name is Sylvia Schwarzberger. I'm the president of EVA since about a little more than a year ago, and I'm very happy to see so many of you interested in this question that is very close to my heart. And when I look out in the room, I see a lot of people who have been working with or as technical attachés, or the name has changed over the years, but there are quite a few people in this audience who have been deeply involved in this, both historically, but also more recently. Myself, I was science counselor or technical attaché. As I said, the name shifts, 2004 to 2007 in Beijing. And that has left a deep imprint on me. I went on to spend 15 years then studying Chinese science and technology policy. We're here today, and I'm so glad that we could organize this seminar to sort of commemorate that it's been 80 years since EVA sent its first, I don't think at that point it was called a technical attaché, but a person to be stationed in actually New York, I was told, to basically bring home relevant knowledge for Swedish companies. And that was in 1945. And I think Sweden is quite unique with that. Some people say we were the first in the world. I don't know. I haven't been able to prove otherwise, but that doesn't mean it's definitely so. But it was definitely where Sweden was quite early, right after the war, realizing that it needed to understand what was happening in terms of technological development in the US and trying to make sure that Swedish companies could benefit from it. Another milestone, which I think is quite interesting, is when I started in Beijing, we actually were in that was when we had reopened the Beijing office, and at that point, the technical attachés were under the authority of the Swedish Agency for Growth Studies. But the Beijing office was actually opened in 1978. First time, which I think is very early, also by other countries' standards, which I think is also quite remarkable. And I think there's sort of a pattern that Sweden has a tradition of understanding the importance of trying to figure out what's happening in terms of science and technology in other countries because it's relevant for its own development and its own competitiveness. And then also interesting, I think when EVA started with this, my understanding is that the original sort of approach was that let's send out somebody who's pretty smart and let them figure out what Sweden needs to know. And I think that has sort of been a philosophy, at least while EVA was running the technical attachés. And then we've had this evolution where EVA created a foundation called STAT, and then eventually the technical attachés went under the authority of different agencies, the Institute for Growth Policy Studies, and then now I'm losing another agency, or the agency actually just changed names. And then eventually, I think 2017, under the Ministry of Trade and Industry, which it might not have been called that at that time. So with that, we're here today to sort of, we're so glad that we could gather so many of the people who are stationed abroad for different organizations, for the ministry, for Stint, with Vinnova, also with Business Sweden, because as you will see, there are quite a lot of organizations that have people stationed abroad to make sense of what's happening technologically and bring the relevant knowledge home. Also, the mission has evolved a little bit, so going from bringing knowledge home, initially in the form of literally sending reports home, to also working more with networking, and then later on also a little bit more with promotion, various forms of promotion. And I'm also personally very happy that since I started as president, we've tried to bring this tradition back to EVA. So we now have two people, we don't call them attachés, we have two experts, Dr. Hye-Jin Kim and Professor Erik Mobrand, stationed partially in Seoul and in Singapore, but also partially in Lund, who are now sort of helping EVA and also EVA's community to understand better what's happening in terms of technology development in Asia. So this is my introduction, and I'm looking forward to a very packed, but hopefully also very interesting 2 hours. I would like to, the next speaker was supposed to be the State Secretary Sara Modig, but she is unwell. And so we're very happy to have David Sigström to replace her, and we're really looking forward to your comments, David. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Sylvia. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this opportunity to comment on the importance of global foresight in a shifting geopolitical landscape. My name is David Sigström. I'm a political advisor for Ms. Ebba Busch on business and industry. And I bring greetings from both Ebba Busch and State Secretary Sara Modig, who had loved to be here today. Sweden is a global innovation leader. We defend our top position in global innovation rankings year after year. It is really a source of national confidence. And the Swedish government is determined to keep it that way. Innovation is critical, not only for national self-esteem, but foremost for long-term growth, competitiveness, and nowadays also a credible defense capability. 1 year ago, the government presented the largest research and innovation bill ever. The bill contains major investment in excellent research, innovation, and strategic technologies. One of the key initiatives with high relevance for today's discussion are the programs for clusters of excellence in strategic and groundbreaking technologies managed by Vinnova and Swedish Research Council. However, we can't take our position for granted. Today, being an innovation leader is not enough for a small country in a world where powerful nations use technology to obtain geopolitical goals and gain leverage in power struggles. In such a situation, it's more important than ever for Sweden to be able to build partnerships with like-minded countries and have access to knowledge and insights for smart and quick decision-making, boots on the ground. And almost 10 years ago, the Swedish government created the Offices of Science and Innovation, moving already existing resources to become part of the government offices. The intention was to increase the analytic capacity with the government and support the creation of strategic partnerships in science and innovation. Of course, this kind of function is not new. We are immensely proud of continuing the long tradition that started with the establishment of the technical attaché, or was it exactly back in 1945 by Eva. The need for tailor-made analysis and cooperation in science and innovation has never been clearer, and it's more important than ever to have people on the ground who can pick up every early signals and act quickly to safeguard Swedish interests. For example, Maria Brogren insight on a Genesis mission, DC's new project on AI, and many such things happening all over the world right now. Because monitoring technology development, science and innovation, as well as building strategic collaboration are crucial for the government's public development and for Swedish industry access to knowledge and value chains that strengthen our long-term competitiveness. And the government's 7 offices of science and innovations abroad, 6 of them being presented here today, play a central role in innovation and science diplomacy and in implementing government policy. And let me give you a few examples of what they have done for Sweden. During the last 2 years, the Office of Science and Innovation have provided essential input to the government's research and innovation bill and the government's strategy for a competitive industry. They have also produced high-quality comparative analysis on semiconductors, quantum, biotechnology, hydrogen, and carbon capture storage technology, shaping our policy development in these areas. They also help Sweden getting deals. One such example from end of October this year was the signing of an MOU on research and innovation between Sweden and the UK, focusing on areas such as AI, telecommunications, and energy. But they are not alone. We have a multitude of key players working together as part of Team Sweden, from our embassies and consulates to agencies and stakeholders such as Business Sweden, Vinnova, Stint, and EVA. Many whom are here today. You all have different mandates and provide different perspectives. Together, you are the essence of Team Sweden abroad. As a small and smart country, we need to coordinate our efforts to use our limited resources in the most efficient way. Making use of the Swedish collaborative mindset, we can push the Team Sweden spirit even further. We have therefore asked the Office of Science and Innovation to explore opportunities for dependent collaboration between stakeholders. And finally, 8 years ago, 1945, the year of peace, truly peace in Europe. That was the year when the first technical attaché was sent out by EVA to New York to report on technological development of importance for Swedish industry. 8 years later, the importance of collaboration has probably never been greater than now. Your job has never been more important. In uncertainty and rapid technological change, we need people like you helping Team Sweden. We need the right knowledge, collaboration, and capacity to react to these changes. You are all part of that solution, and together we can find a way forward to ensure future prosperity for our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And I fully agree that perhaps the need for collaboration has not been as great for a long time as it is today, but also the need for understanding different environments, right? As our world is getting more fragmented, unfortunately, and risks perhaps drifting more apart. We're going to now follow up with a panel discussion. So I would like to ask Darja Isaksson, the Director General of Vinnova, Andreas Götenberg, the Managing Director of Stint, and Jani Heinonen, the Head of Invest at Business Sweden, to join me up here. Thank you. So the reason we're very glad to have you here is because you also all have people stationed abroad. And I would like to maybe, because the Stint Science Fellows are here, but the people that Vinnova has stationed abroad are not here, neither are the ones that Business Sweden has abroad. So maybe very briefly, I would start with Darja and Jani. Do you want to say very briefly, Darja, where do you have a foreign presence?
Yes, so I think this works now, yeah. Related to the government missions that we do have, we have staff in Brussels, of course, sharing space office with the Swedish Research Council. We have staff in the US, Stanford campus, and in the Nordic Innovation House in Silicon Valley. We also have people at the embassies of Tel Aviv and in Singapore.
Thank you. Yeah, Jani, do you want to say a few words about it?
Yeah, thanks, Sylvia. So Business Sweden has 45 offices in 40 countries, so covering quite a wide area of the globe. And quite recently, since we also have now the trade and development assignments from the government, we have also gone into markets where we might not have opened office from the export and investment point of view. So, for instance, Nigeria is a good example of that. So you will see us, I think, more in countries that are a bit more exotic for us from before.
Thank you. Maybe, Andreas, mention also briefly where your science fellows are located, right?
Yes, we have 2 Stint representatives, one in North America and one in China, ASEAN. And then we have 3 science fellows, 1 in Japan, South Korea, 1 in Africa, and then 1 in South America.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to start off with a question maybe to all of you. So, why do you have these people abroad, or what are you trying, what is the main objectives that are why do you think it's necessary or valuable to have these people? I don't know who would like to start.
Maybe if I start, we have about 400 people abroad, and most of them, I think 95% are local staff from that specific market there where we are. And I think that obviously the main reason to have it like that is to bring in that local market understanding and support for a Swedish company that wants to find opportunities or grow in that specific market. Or then the other way around, as I'm in charge of investment promotion, to discuss with the local business community to identify opportunities of companies that are looking at Europe and maybe also see potential in investing into Sweden. And in that case, obviously, most of those dialogues are between local people, and then most of our trade and investment commissioners, they are Swedish nationals, but still a big percentage are the local people.
And we'll get back to that. Andreas.
Yes, so in our case, basically, we live in a complex world, and there's a lot of emerging countries in science, and we can see that we need much more understanding and trend analysis of what's going on in the world. And our target group is basically higher education institutions and primarily university leaders, so that they can make more strategic and well-informed decisions. And we call this science intelligence, and that is, if we say, a proactive way of having evidence-based trend analysis on site. And those in our overseas team all have a research background from Sweden and have a PhD, and they are embedded in environments where science policy are taking place. And also in this case, being a foundation inspired by STAT, we can take different actions that is difficult for governmental agencies to do. So we're really trying to see as a foundation and NGO how we can work in this way. And also the way that we work abroad is really that these 5 representatives and science fellows really should tell us what we need to know about the world, because it's really hard to come up and say, go and figure out this or that when you're sitting back at home. The important thing is really, what do we need to know in order to be more strategic in Sweden? And in our case, how can Swedish higher education institutions be more strategic?
Thanks a lot, Andreas. Darja.
Well, you said 3 words before, and Sylvia, you said bring home, network, facilitate. If I look into our instruction, it's to fund research and innovation and build effective innovation systems capable of actually addressing serious challenges and bring about innovation. And that is at its heart a very international endeavor, where you have to connect with the very best innovation environments. And that actually has been the guiding principles of where Vinnova has presence in some of the best ecosystems in the world. And that means that in order for us to both connect the systems in an effective way, help with the networking, the mobilization, but also with the policy and the collaboration at the policy level, we need people on the ground, but also to support the government with recommendations. So both for the quality of what we do, but also for the quality of the recommendations we give others, and in order to help the Swedish innovation system. And then I'll say that for that, this is super important, because we have staff at home working with strategic analysis. We have international collaborations with Tufte and other government agencies such as ourselves. We have collaborations with OECD, we have with EVA. We can do the number crunching and read the reports, but you really need local presence to really get inside and understand the sense making in another way, to build the relationships also that actually make it possible to take risk together with other countries, which we definitely need to do now. So, and that's also why, this is not about just keeping track of technology. It's about keeping track of policy, of ways of working, and all these other things that you sometimes find out in reports, but other times not. I'll just into this room, like notice, I don't know if Taiwan has like 200 people at the ministries working with that at home, Singapore as well. So for Vinnova, being able to have local presence, but we will never be enough anyway. So that's why I'm actually also very grateful to be here, because we're also very well aware that even this kind of strategic foresight work that we are doing together is a capability that we build together. So that's what I'm hoping also we will talk about, how do we nudge it even more. But that would be the main motive for our present.
Fantastic. And I think you've all sort of touched upon this issue, because what I see when I listen to you is that and then when you link it with the ministries' envoys of the science and innovation fellows or counselors, you see an ecosystem emerging, right, of people that are stationed abroad for slightly different reasons. But it is very interesting, because I think as science and technology comes closer to business and politics, perhaps than ever before, we see this kind of rapprochement, or this kind of merging, right, of these interests. So would you like to reflect a little, and I guess I have two questions you can choose. One is, as somebody who was stationed abroad myself, one of the questions I would have is, how do you make sure that the knowledge or the intelligence you generate, or the networks you generate, or the promotion you're involved in actually ends up somewhere productive at home? That would be one question I would have. And another question would be, where do you see, you who have worked from different angles with a foreign presence for quite a long time now, what is your reflection on the Swedish system? Is there something missing? Is there something we should do better together? Where do you see this going? Also, as David mentioned, now that the world is sort of moving in a slightly different direction than it has for the past 30 years, perhaps. So you get to choose either of these easy questions. Or both. Do you want to start, Taya, or some?
Well, I mean, if I can also come back after thinking a bit more. But so first of all, it was super inspirational with the Nobel Prize in Economy, and just listening to Professor Agion reminding us of the importance of innovation being the actual driver of societal progress. But then, in the framework conditions, how important institutional capacity for change is, and we're all part of that, right? So in this, let's just, you talked about geopolitics before. We will have to. So I guess that one of the things that I'm grateful for is that the people I see in the room, and I also know goes for my colleagues, is that when they are looking and sense making, it's not just technology, it's also the policy perspective, it's also the work process, and these are so deeply embedded. So that's one thing. I think one of the things that are happening now is like, how do we make the most of all the opportunities with AI? In terms of, making more of what's available to us. So that's one thing where we are moving as an organization. I'm sure you are too, but that would be a discussion here, where I think we just need more capacity in a way, and that's not just people. I also think that that this ability to be aware that this is to shape our entire toolbox, because that's essential now. So really having that broad perspective. It's different types of policy, different way of working. And then I'm interested in where do we see the most. So I guess that would be my capacity, people, knowledge, tools, work processes, and also a broad perspective on the toolbox.
And what you mentioned before, that we can look at some other countries that have an even higher ambition in terms of this kind of presence. Is that sort of what you're saying?
Well, absolutely, yeah. From anything from tech policy, diplomacy.
Yeah, tech diplomacy, yeah. Great, Andreas.
Yes, so I can combine your two questions briefly. So first of all, how we bring things home is that we write reports, we have meetings, everything from high-level meetings in small groups to seminars like yesterday. And then also this kind of networking with delegations and so on. And it's very important that those abroad actually meet those at home. Because I think, and from my own experience, about the same time you were in Beijing, I was in the Tokyo office of ITPS. And then really I think those in Sweden who are interested to know things really want to meet those that are out there and have the first-hand experience. So I think that is really important to remember. and then also for our team members abroad to understand themselves what the questions are among the Swedish university leaderships and funders. And then in Stint's case, how we can work with this is also, we see ourselves as a national knowledge resource for internationalization. And then also we're a funder, so we're a combination of a think tank and funder, which is actually more like an action tank. So I think that is our added value. And then to your second question, I think if we compare to especially Switzerland with Swissnex, we can see that they have, I don't know now, but a few years ago they had like 12 people in the Shanghai office, or 15 maybe, and then in many other locations. And then, we're different players in Sweden doing this, as you said in the beginning, in different ways, depending on how we see it from our different organizations, and also depending on the different conditions and mandates we have. So I think that we can do a lot more of this, and we need a lot more of this, because it's a really complex world with many challenges and opportunities, and we need to identify them so that various stakeholders in Swedish knowledge system can make well-informed strategic decisions.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Jani.
Well, actually, I love this question. I'm a pretty old Finnish person in my soul, but I'm a Swedish baby because I'm maybe a 2-year-old citizen in Sweden. And I think that when I look at the opportunities in Sweden, I always get really amazed and really inspired. At the same time, I also get sometimes maybe a little bit even disappointed how underutilized a lot of the platforms can be, because we are not connecting the dots. And I think that that's also why it's so important we have this discussion here today. I think that there has been a world where we have been before, but there's a world where we are going into, and we really need to look at that one. And then, we need to somehow leave the old past behind us and then build it in a new way. And we all talk about great cooperation and all these beautiful words, but unless we really start to get this into shared KPIs of what we need to achieve and do things, then we always will go, at certain point back to our shells, and stay in that focused area that we have been given, and the budget and mandates that we're having. So I think, for instance, in this area, I love the pre-question we had here, like, what would you do if, you could have all these things playing together? I would see that we would have a kind of central intelligence tech kind of scouting machine that is out there combining all our different skills that we have in different organizations, giving input all the time back to Sweden. We have a tech minister, as Sylvia has been talking about. We have a tech minister and staff and some kind of diagnostic unit almost here that looks into that. Does this fit into Sweden? Is this knowledge and this technology is being created? Is it raising our competitiveness? Should we somehow bring it to Sweden? Okay, what does that mean for actors like Vinnova? What is the agenda for Business Sweden? Which kind of investments do we need to bring to fill some certain gaps? Which companies are we aiming at to really build a roadmap like that? On going from that, so that we're not only stuck in that the knowledge is there, great, we know it. It's also down here. Okay, what do we do with it? How does it really kind of come to materialize? What kind of R&D programs are there? Why are companies wanting to invest here in Sweden? So that's my kind of 5 cents on it.
Thanks a lot. And we have way too little time, but I forgot to mention one of the reasons I was so glad you came, because we met actually almost 20 years ago when you were my counterpart stationed in Shanghai, but for Finland. And I think my memory is that was somewhat, I think, before we started talking about Team Sweden, when Finland was actually working quite coordinated, at least it seemed from my vantage point at that point. So I think that brings it home very well. There would be so much more to talk about, but I think this is an interesting introduction into 3 very different organizations that see a need for a foreign presence, but also trying to figure out how it fits together, and also not least with the ministry's foreign presence. So thank you so much. We're now I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Nelson Torto, who is a fellow of EVA, but also one of the science fellows at Stint. And before Nelson became a science fellow at Stint, you might mention that, but that's when we met. I think you were permanent secretary for the Ministry of Higher Education and Research in Botswana, along with many other titles. So we're looking forward to hearing from you, Nelson. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege for me to be here, and as you said, Sylvia, as a fellow, and also as a stint senior fellow in Africa, and most importantly, also as a father to my little boy who's at the back, who agreed to come and be with me all the way from Botswana. Let me just say that for the remaining time that I have, I'm going to focus on three things. The first thing is that I'm going to say a few words about my home, the place that you call Africa. The second thing is that I'm just going to talk about some of the driving principles that really could put Africa in a different space. And I'll conclude by giving some examples in terms of STI as per topic. From a geopolitical perspective, I think this really has been a platform that has given us all. Firstly, it allowed Africa to be on the table. Secondly, it also brought in the African Union as a representative of the countries in the continent. But it also brought a lot of chaos in the sense that, I think if you recall some years back when I spoke here, I was saying that when Mandela was released out of prison, I think he was the first person to begin to say, you know what, you cannot tell me who I can be friends with. And we have seen that at the AU platform where African presidents have been coming out very strongly and being very confident. But this really, it put South Africa versus the US, and I think the result was not what people expected. But what I can say is that South Africa really stood its ground. And of course, because of that, the drama continues because South Africa has not been invited by the US to the G20. I don't know whether it's a good thing or it's a bad thing. But what we've seen is that it's beyond Africa saying what it feels it deserves. There are other players that have come on board. And I just want to share with you, this is Jeffrey Sachs.
Unlike the first time of Pan-Africanism, Britain, France, and the United States can't stop it this time. Because Pan-Africanism was stopped from the outside, not from the inside. It was stopped by a bullet in the head of Patrice Lumumba. It was stopped by repeated overthrows by the CIA and MI6, and it cannot happen anymore. They don't have the power, they don't have the space, and Africa can prevent it.
So, like I said, Africa is home. It's home, and we welcome everyone. And of course, literally, some of the countries who fill Africa very nicely have actually found home in the continent. I think I'll mention that towards the end. But I think what is very critical is the fact that we are still reeling from the effects of 1845, post the Berlin Conference, where, it was the situation where there was a conclusion on the scramble for Africa. What we've ended up with is a continent which is divided, which is fragmented, which really for societies, for nations that should be close to each other, they're not necessarily close to each other because of different reasons. So this has presented a lot of challenges, and it makes being in Africa a challenging proposition, simply because when you move from one zone to the other, you encounter different challenges and problems. I should say that common sense has prevailed, because over the past few years, Africa has seen the need to really be together and create one African market, because we know that in Africa, in terms of the internal trade, it's less than 15% really for the continent, given the numbers that we have, and that should not be the case. We know that for Europe, probably it's more than 60%. So the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement really, I think, is one of the big things that have happened in the continent. I think you can begin to say, clearly, Africa can come up with one voice and begin to address some other things that it cannot really address, because IMF, if you see the address, it's in the US, and it serves the US in a different way, and it marginalizes smaller countries, smaller populations, if you want to advance from a financial perspective. So there are a few documents that are very important to the African continent, and one of the ones is Agenda 2063, which is really the strategy for Africa. This really pronounces what Africa should do and what are the things that Africa can benefit if it was to focus on different aspects. But one other important document, which is very key for us from a science engineering perspective, is TISA. This is the revised version, for the TISA 2034, Obviously, if Africa was to put its money where its mouth where the money is, or the money where the mouth is, both of them are very important, it will be able to drive some of the key issues. And we've seen this year that, I mean, the African Development Bank, for the first time, it has got the largest budget ever. And so clearly things can improve. And I think TISA is a parameter that the African continent can benefit from. Again, you have seen that, given that AI is taking a very important role in our lives, the African continent as well has come up with an AI strategy, which is very, very key there's a need to infuse it in different aspects. The African leading universities, Arua, had a conference in Uganda recently, where clearly it was articulating how AI should be used in research in the African continent. And I think this is something that needs to be applauded from that perspective. In the past, we have had collaborations with different entities from an African continent perspective. And obviously, initially it was just, collaborations that were lopsided in terms of the relationships. But of course, for that to be addressed, there's been a need to come up with an Africa Charter on transformative research collaborations. This really is a way of now trying to find a way of having equitable collaborations. And one of my first assignments for next year is that I'll be attending this conference, the Madiba Nexus, which again will be pitching funders against each other in terms of really sitting down and having an engagement as how can we best work together. And I think it's a very, very important development. What we saw in the past was because of the fact that money was coming from the north, ideas were coming from the north, research leaders were coming from the north, we were having this type of mobility from Africa to the north and north to south. This mobility did not really grow research leaders, unfortunately, because things were done according to how the money was shaped and how the money was directed. So because of efforts in the continent, we have now seen an approach which is Africa-focused, Africa-centered, and Africa-driven, where there has been an enhanced activity in the continent because of the fact that mobility within Africa, intra-African mobility has increased. And of course, we have so many groups that exist. And this is one of the things that I bring to the attention of the Swedish higher education, that yes, you might be having these collaborations you've had in the past 20 years, 30 years with whatever universities, but there are other entities that are coming up that we need to really consider, because these are coming up and they might also just have their own budgets. So it's not an issue of we are going to collaborate with this entity and then we probably need to give them some money. No, I think it's a place where we can begin to interact at an ideation level where we can be able to share the experiences. One of the key things about the continent is that in 20 to 40 years from now, 1 in every 4 persons in the planet will be African. And there's a youth advantage, which is a big deal. And because of that, us in the continent, and I think others as well, realize that there's a huge potential that Africa presents. So there are different tasks relating to growing leadership in the continent. There are different tasks relating to identifying a more important role for the girl child, so that we can bring them in this space where they can really play a critical role in science and innovation. That picture was taken last week. We were in Johannesburg with UNESCO L'Oreal. These were the awards for the young talents. I've been a jury for this for the past 5 years. And of course, Africa Week was in Kigali, where there were about 4,000 people who were interacting, young people from the continent, girls and boys that are really coming up with innovations that will be able to help the continent. The other thing is that the United Nations Development Programme has realized that there's a need to come up with nodes, again, taking advantage of the demography, of the youth dividend that exists. They've identified different nodes here. These nodes are going to play a different role. So there's investments that are going to be made to be able to come up with startups. Obviously, the aim is to try to consume the numbers of youth that exist, that have the capacity. UNDP also has identified 13 countries where we've got university pods. I know there's one in Botswana, there's one in Uganda, and some other places. Again, to provide a space where the youth can be able to interact, innovate. You don't necessarily need to have a degree to do some of these things. So they're giving an opportunity to everyone, which is very important. So as I conclude, I just want to say that from a Swedish perspective, in fact, I should mention that I should mention that in terms of the UNIPODs, in terms of the UNDP activities, Chalmers is quite involved in this. They're quite involved as an advisor for innovation. I think it's quite critical from a Swedish perspective. But we also have this South Africa-Sweden University Forum, SASUF. We recently launched the new version of SASUF at the Science Forum South Africa. And I think what is critical about this new version is that it now shifts the collaborations from just being focused on South Africa to being focused in Africa and the industries as well. I just want to conclude by saying that as we do all these other things, I think we should be mindful of the fact that there are other things that are happening in the background, particularly in China. This was a Chinese official in DRC, where clearly they want to really bring a big portion of China into DRC under the pretense of this and that. But DRC, you know that it's one of the victims of the Berlin conference in terms of the activities that are going on now, because everyone wants to have a share of the minerals, and because of that, chaos is enhanced, encouraged, and promoted. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nelson. Unfortunately, we're a little behind. I want to ask if anybody has a question to Nelson, and while you're thinking about that, I just want to say Nelson also has, we forgot to mention, a PhD from Lund University. This, in fact, is a feature. I think the STIN Science Fellows is to make sure that they have a relevant link or anchoring in Sweden, so I would encourage you to talk to Nelson. And I did an analysis on inter-African science collaboration about 10 years ago, where you could see exactly what you said, that there was very little among the African countries, and I think a lot has happened in the meantime, which I think is very exciting. But that was one of the features, exactly as you talked about, right? That's been. So if nobody has a question, I think we'll move on, but there will be opportunity to talk to Nelson. I will now hand over to Tina Karlberg, who will take us through the panel sessions. And Tina, we also met. It sounds like that's what happened when you get older. You know a lot of people. We met, I think, in 2008, or 2009, when you were in China, when you were promoting Swedish environmental technology in China, and you are now president of Sweco International AB, but we're also a science counselor in the Swedish Embassy in Beijing. So we're very happy that you will take us through these sessions. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sylvia. Really interesting talks and discussions before we are now moving to the two final panels. I would like to ask up onto the stage a number of persons, where the first panel will circle around the question about academic and scientific collaboration. And I would like to ask onto the stage Maria Brogren, Washington. Where are you? There you are. Former colleague of mine. Welcome up, Maria. Daniel Ekström, my successor in Beijing. Welcome as well. Niklas Kviselius. Are you there? Yes. From based in the US also. A stint from stint. Hyejin Kim. No, sorry, that's the next one. We have instead Erik Mobrandt, IVA fellow. And Laura Barbieri, also stint, Asia or Tokyo based. Welcome to the stage. Give them a hand. So we hope to, through this panel with well-connected, experienced people, we want to serve you some insights on the development of international and academic and scientific collaboration in your respective countries, with the backdrop or the perspective of these shifting and sort of moving global landscapes. And I would like to ask you first, you have to share your microphones. I think that will work just fine. I would like to ask each one of you, we can start with Maria, from your vantage points now, what shifts in global research collaboration that you can observe in your countries? And if there are any new innovative collaboration models that you would like to highlight? So would you like to start, Maria?
Thank you, Tina. Well, from my vantage point in the US, I see as most of you also see, I know that you follow the news, and there are news every day from the US, from the White House. I see that science, technology, and innovation are geopolitical power factors, and it's a race, and the US is committed to win that race, and either you're with them or you're against them. So one instrument that the US is increasingly using is strategic partnerships with selected trusted allies to secure the value chains for critical technologies. And they have a list of technologies, as we know that many countries have these critical technologies like AI and semiconductors, quantum and biotech, for example. And they want to reduce the exposure to coercive dependencies, which means that they don't want to be dependent on China anymore. You might have heard the term tech prosperity deals. These are bilateral agreements that the US has made with a couple of selected countries to secure the value chains and to have joint research and technology development. And in addition to these technology prosperity deals, they have multilateral partnerships with selected countries with focus on certain technologies, such as an entirely new Pax Silica for the AI and semiconductor value chain, and another on the Global Coalition on Telecommunications. And within the US, lastly, domestically, they have, as David mentioned earlier, recently announced the Genesis mission to, turbocharge the AI development in the US. I mean, a lot is already happening, but now they are connecting all the 17 national research labs with supercomputers, all the data, the most powerful algorithms. And the goal of this project, which they include also, of course, with the business sector, which is heart and center to the Trump administration. The goal is to double the productivity and impact of American research and innovation within a decade.
You have been in the US for a number of years. Can you see sort of that this is sharpened somehow, or is it sort of a stable policy? I mean, we all know that the world looks differently now than a couple of years back.
It is a huge shift towards these, narrow strategic research areas, which are technologies. And also and then the federal government should only support research that is directed to strengthen the economic and national security. The other things can, other can fund the other research areas.
Yeah. Okay, Daniel, shall we move over to China?
Yes. No, but I think it's obvious. So I've just been in China for 1.5 months, but I was there 10 years ago, so I kind of have the opportunity to actually compare and see a little bit of the development. I think what's very, very clear is that geopolitics is very present in all the discussions around science and technology in China, and shapes much of sort of the conversation in terms of collaboration as well. And I think what's interesting and really complicates things here, right, is on the one hand, I think the opportunities has never been bigger. China climbing on multiple rankings, both in terms of research output, also on the innovation area as well, first time ever on the top 10 of the Global Innovation Index this year. It really is kind of a different kind of opportunities for collaborating with China these days. On the other side, I think the risk has also grown quite a bit, both in terms of the sense that I think the risk has always been there, but we are probably observing them much more today. At the same time, I think there's also movements, not at least given sort of like where geopolitics is moving, that is further making it complicated to work. So it is really sort of, and in some ways also I think the opposite side of what's happening in the US. I think China in a similar way is set on sort of being a global leader on the scientific scene. At the same time, I think some of the ships are kind of vice versa. Maybe we are moving towards some sort of equilibrium where China is really enforcing sort of its focus on basic research these days and going forward as well.
Just a follow-up question to you. And I observed when I was in China before you came over that they were sort of trying to find their way on how to get at least Europe back on the scene, on the stage, while Europe was like, maybe next week we can have a meeting. We're not that keen. Have you seen anything so far in terms of how they try and attract foreign collaborators?
I think they're working very actively, sometimes with more or less success, maybe. But there are definitely sort of initiatives, and I think China is also quite proactively seeking collaboration with Europe, but also other partners in the global south, etc. So there is really this, I think, interest of China to increase collaboration. I think there's also a view in China that the existing model of collaboration has served them well. But I think also maybe on the opposite side, there is growing interest to sort of step into the complexity. We're seeing countries trying to find ways in sort of this more complicated landscape and finding ways. But I think I still think that the risks are very evident and present in the conversations.
Great, thank you. Moving on to Niklas.
Yeah, I was thinking of two things on the way here. First, Maria mentioned kind of selectiveness. I think that's a big trend. Like the
sorry, and I don't know if I mentioned when you came up, you're also based in the US.
Yes. So I'm covering US and Canada. So I'm mixing the two countries. But I mean, American universities, Canadian US universities, they're open for business. They want partnerships. They haven't closed down. But there is the sharper use of kind of filters, be it data or partnerships areas where these filters are leading to kind of a more narrow, I guess, partnership. And the selective openness is, I'd say, one trend based on, legislation such as CHIPS Act and a lot of things, right? And then one thing I was thinking is that, this kind of trifecta or triple of the academia, business, industry, and government, some would argue that kind of raised our welfare in Sweden too. For decades, we were having this kind of close collaboration between academia and industry and to some extent academia. That's kind of what we see again, especially in US, to some extent Canada, where, defense spending and other geopolitical things, the government policies are really affecting academia as well. So at least for the time being, for some years now, I think that triple is going to become even stronger. So, yeah.
Is there any special reflections from your side on especially Canada, which, I mean, is not going to become the 51st state, right?
No, definitely not.
I mean, how are they? Have they shifted somehow?
I think they grew up. I say I'm not a Trump supporter in any shape or form, but for Canada specifically, it's been very interesting to see for the first time some spine and some willingness to position themselves and look for really deep European connections. Yeah. So kind of growing up from being the poor cousin in the north to really look for partnerships. So as a case in point, a lot of the filters we talked about, the selective openness also applies to Canada. They're also very cautious, but I think they're way more interesting as a partner than just a few years back. And they show that through Horizon interest and a lot of other things. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Very interesting. Thank you very much. Yes, next. Asia. Now we are coming over to Asia again.
Yeah, thanks. I think we hear often now about the ways that geopolitics impinges on international science collaboration, but I'd like to suggest reframing that a little bit, that international science collaboration has always depended on a particular kind of geopolitical configuration. And this configuration has now basically been shattered. And the trend I see in the region and maybe elsewhere is kind of being blinkered and figuring out how do we make sense of this new order and react to it. Briefly, to go over this shattering in Asia, it is a story of the United States in the 1970s incorporating China into the international system, delegating middleman roles to its friends in East Asia, roles that proved lucrative for those countries, that became very innovative on the leading edge of technologies, drawing on Chinese labor, and set kind of the basis for this era of prosperity and globalization for the rest of us. At the same time, the US made two fateful decisions. One was to leave its military across the Pacific, even after the Cold War was done, and the other was to deindustrialize the economy. And those decisions did a lot to get us into the trouble we have today and the very new geopolitical situation we have. Meanwhile, back in the old days of globalization, in Asia, that sort of geopolitics made international science collaboration possible within that region and from that region to other parts of the world. There was a geopolitical basis to it, and then there was also a set of national political games that for each of many of the countries in the region, getting involved in international science collaboration was part of national competition. It was a way to help the country catch up economically and in terms of strength. In Europe, too, we had geopolitics underpinning international science collaboration. It was Europeanization. It was a different sort of politics, but it was nonetheless politically embedded. I think what has happened in the celebration over international science is a kind of amnesia about the politics that underpins it, whether in Europe or in Asia. And I find that to be dangerous. There's kind of this dehistoricization of liberalism, of democracy, of international science. And once you dehistoricize these rather nice things, then you're in a really weak position to defend them. And I think that's kind of the situation that we are in. And so what I see with universities and organizations in Korea and other parts of Asia is trying to figure out how to come to terms with the new world. And so universities are put in very difficult positions when China unrolls new rules on hosting researchers coming from abroad. Do we just sign up wholesale to these rules, or do we do something different, or do we not send our researchers to China? These are tough decisions, and they're entirely new, and they have to be made by people who don't have the qualifications to really make them. Those sorts of problems arise, and I think that is a major trend that I observe.
Yeah, I can understand that. And it's also, I mean, in the middle here also, you had a very nice speech, really, for why it is so important to have people like you out in the field, because we need to understand this all the time, to not fall into that trap of, there is no history, there is no.
That's right. I think this echoes some of the comments that were made earlier in relation to the whole mission of having technical attachés and so on, is that things like international science ought not be taken for granted.
No, for sure.
They came about for contingent reasons, and one needs to, if one believes in them, one needs to, I think, protect them.
Okay, last but not least, Laura, a stint.
Yes. Thank you.
From stint, yes.
Yes, and speaking for Japan, which I know a bit better, I've just started in Korea, so I will talk mostly about my perspective in Japan and connected to what you just said. I think, yes, also from the meetings that I've been having with universities or other entities, I see that there's some more seeking advice and also trying to understand what others like Sweden, which are considered aligned, are doing in this situation. Because I think also Japan is moving to a more strategic and perhaps mission-oriented kind of collaborations, and especially, although Japanese people don't usually like talking about politics, they are talking more about geopolitics, and they are being more security aware. The word security is really on the mouth of everyone right now. And so I've seen a shift from more perhaps broad and open-ended collaborations to more selective collaborations, and you all mentioned. And always following national priorities. I think a main difference from Sweden, for example, is that in Japan, funding projects, they tend to be very much top-down, so following these priorities that are set by the government. And although universities are autonomous and independent, and particularly since they had this major reform of corporatization of universities, they are independent, but they are expected to operate within this kind of frame from the government and national goals. And you also were talking about new models that we've seen, and I think there is an increase in multilateral projects and also in consortia of like cooperation between industry, academia, and government with a long-term funding, like longer, more stable, and I think so these hybrid models are perhaps becoming more common, and also in terms of mobility. What I've seen talking to universities, rather than having maybe project-based exchanges and short-term exchanges, they're trying to have more rotational exchanges of like joint labs, for example, or this kind of more trusted collaborations. So I think there's a bit of a tendency now to look for excellent partners, but also more resilient and kind of sustainable, trusted partners, because there is a bit of fear of this situation, perhaps, and is so they feel like they have to be more selective.
So it seems like we have some kind of a common denominator here, maybe with the exception of China, I'm not sure, of really making sure that you know who you're inviting to dinner. So both between Japan and Canada and the US, at least, Korea for sure as well. And then China is there, standing in the middle, shining with all its research. It's quite interesting, the research and the risks. Is there anything, we don't have a lot of time left actually, but very briefly, anything that we here and in the research community in Sweden as a whole, what are we overlooking? What are we not seeing in your respective countries or regions? Who would like to start? Anything that, now is your moment, you have the time here to have the whole audience listening to you. What are we missing?
Is this the
Maria?
last question?
I think so, yes. I'm looking at the time.
Well, I think that
a quick one.
Swedish universities already follow very closely what's going on and the executive orders that comes out from the White House. But two things, research security, to be aware. The US wants, collaborators to apply to the same principles when it comes to research security. I know that this is something that we are working really hard on in Sweden, to have support functions and so on, but this is really, you need to know this. Also, intellectual property rights. The Americans are really good at sort of
defending IPR.
Yes, to defending that, so it can, and also with how we work with this in Sweden. In practice, you could end up as a Swedish professor. You could end up defending your IPR in a court with all the Department of War's lawyers against you.
No, but I think what many people have alluded to earlier, like I think the risk management aspect of this is very important. I think there tends to be sometimes in the discussion around it this idea that if we just do this, then we kind of solved it, or that it's something that is overgoing. I think this is sort of something that we are in for in the long run, to really need to build capabilities to actually understand who we're dealing with, what are the different areas which are more sensitive, what are the actual different risks involved in different kind of research. And I think also, maybe unfortunately, this is something that needs to cost a bit of money. We need to allocate part of research budgets also to make sure that we actually can deal with this, both in terms of starting up projects, but this is something that needs to be really ongoing as well all the time.
I agree.
Risk management continuously in research relations.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yes, who wants to go next? Yes.
No, I was going to say, I still think Swedish universities, our main stakeholders, still maybe underestimate how much geopolitics is shaping funding, research funding decisions. Now, it's not like something that's going to go over in a few years, or let's wait it out. It's really, that's the current status. As a general comment, one message I often have is that we often seen in Sweden, from US also to a Canadian perspective, a bit too administrative and slow. Often the US-Canadian programs, they are very fast and fast-moving, big. So we have to have the right decision makers in the room quickly, and not kind of lose opportunities because we're too admin heavy. It's like too messy.
Fast feet. Yes.
Agile.
Erik next.
Yeah, I think there is space to incorporate intelligence gathering more broadly defined into strategy making in academia, whether it's in universities or in agencies that are supporting universities. And by intelligence, I mean knowing more of that informal stuff, having contextual knowledge about what are partners trying to get out of something. And I think it goes beyond due diligence or risk assessment. It is strategy. Part of it may be uncertainty or risk, but there's more to it than that. And in fact, it can be done, I think, relatively cheaply. It just takes certain kinds of knowledge and then incorporating that into building strategies. And I think having knowledge about places that we're working with will help us a lot when we're dealing with other places.
Cultural aspects, rather.
Cultural, I mean, often is more organizational culture, political culture. But I think there is, my observation is there is a bit too much of a tendency to assume from a Swedish side that those we're dealing with are similar to us and trying to build solidarity. But Eurovision should not be the model for international science collaboration. And that's a good thing, right? We should be able to get along with people who are different from us, understanding that they're different, and then we can do amazing things together.
Yeah, now we have to move to Laura.
Yeah, exactly. I agree very much in terms of what Niklas said with the speed and the scale that things are happening in Asia, and also this contextual knowledge. I think we can really help tell you like where things are happening, and because they're changing so fast and they're following these national policies that are really shaping the funding and how universities operate. I think in Asia, like internationalization is not just a goal, but is a tool for them, and so we have to see it as like the way they are using this tool. And for example, in Japan, they are putting these big endowment funds to some universities. So those are the universities that perhaps we should target as potential collaborators, because they will be investing a lot in internationalization. So they will be seeking more partnerships. So I think it's good to have insights in the region, because we can tell which universities are possibly approaching more international collaborations.
Good, both soft and hard facts or understandings we need to have there. I think we have to actually, as previously, we have to push the questions until afterwards, and you will stay here and be available, I hope so. Thank you very much for your insights. And I would like to ask up the next panel. Now let's see if I get the names right. Erik Forsberg, Stint. Yeah, we did some working together, right? Asia, Cecilia, Tal, there you are. India, Delhi, OSI. Now it's time for you. Here, Kim from Singapore and Lund, right? Janne Heinonen, you're already up there. Wonderful. Did I forget anyone? Erik, Cecilia. Oh, yes, I did. Oh, this will be painful. Hello. So this panel now, we are moving from more of academic and research collaboration into the innovation space, which is, I don't know if it can be more affected by geopolitics, because the previous panel really rub that in, that there is a lot of geopolitics into the research field, but innovation, I think, is very much affected by the geopolitics in any case. So we have here Erik, Cecilia, so Asia, Malaysia, China, Asia. Cecilia, Delhi, India. Hyejin, Singapore, Lund. And Asia broadly, maybe China as well. Janne, Asia and Sweden. China and Sweden. Lars, Seoul, Tokyo. So quite an Asian panel here. So if you look at technology, innovation, business partnerships, they are, again, they are very shaped by geopolitics. They are very shaken by geopolitics by now. And from your regions, from your region or your countries, I would like you to elaborate a bit on the trends that are shaping the collaborations between Sweden and the countries or regions where you are active. I think I'll shake the boat now and start with Lars.
Lucky me, I got forgotten.
Didn't expect that, right?
Yeah, so in terms of in Japan and South Korea, we've heard some of this before, but we're seeing a really clear shift from industrial policy or industrial endeavors being a source of economic security to economic security actually guiding industrial policy and innovation policy in these countries. And I think this is, this is where we cannot expect anymore for pricing or quality to be just the sole source of, the collaboration in terms of innovation, collaboration, et cetera. But we have to look at also how are countries aligning with themselves strategically as a major factor. And that is something that is, quite different from the way we've seen it before. Another effect is also, and we can't understate enough, really, the role that these foundational technologies are having in shaping this shift. I mean, the massive investments that are being done. We've heard about some of these, with this Genesis project, et cetera, into AI and so forth. Development of standards, for example, is becoming not just something that everybody is aiming towards, but you want to set the rules. You want to dictate the forms for that standard setting. And this, I think, is something important when it comes to, like, for example, these centers of excellence moving forth. How do we carve out a niche on this? Because we're not going to be able to compete in scale on some of these things. So what is the strategic niche? How do we differentiate ourselves to align strategically with the countries that we're interested in? And this is a very relevant fact.
And then we have to prioritize.
And then we have to prioritize, absolutely.
That hurts.
Damn, I hate that happens. And the other thing is that, of course, in this context that we're moving in, we're in a geopolitical roller coaster. Sweden is not going to be sitting behind the steering wheel of that. We're going to be tossed around in it. And that's scary, but there is opportunity there as well, obviously. And Japan and South Korea are also on this roller coaster. They're more affecting the direction of it, but they're also being tossed around. And in that, they are looking for places to hold on to. They are looking for areas where they can feel, safe and find new alliances. So when certain bridges, burn, you build new ones in different directions. So that's something that we should be very aware of. And Sweden has an outstanding position to actually capitalize on that opportunity.
Shall we move to Yanni? You have a slightly different role since you are working with investment promotion, so to speak, in Sweden, but you're still active in this region.
Well, yeah, obviously, maybe just to clarify, I used to be based in Shanghai for 14 years, partly working for the China part, but then a lot for East Asia when I joined Business Sweden 6.5 years ago. And then, so I'm pretty much more in Asia still in my mindset than maybe in Sweden, having been here for 4.5 years. And as you heard earlier, I've also been working as an innovation counselor in China in the past. But I think taking on the hat, from the investments point of view, Lars touched a lot about investments here already. It is a kind of crucial driver for us that we get the right kind of investments into Sweden now and in the future. Still, foreign-owned companies cover about 50% of Swedish exports, so it is like a foundation of this, and also around over 40% of private R&D is from foreign-owned enterprises. So we need to have a continuous churn of good investments coming into Sweden. But that means for us in investment promotion is that we are of course not trying to attract investments from all 40 markets where Business Sweden is. It's much more focused. We only have 7 focus markets and around 10 project markets, and in the focus markets Asia has a big role. So South Korea, Japan and India are our focus markets. China used to be one, but we've had to be coming down into a much more focused model due to all reasons that we already have discussed about here today. And then kind of raising one kind of point here is obviously, Cecilia will probably come to that, but India is really for us a rising star right now. So everybody know about the market opportunities in India, and India being a great export opportunity, Swedish companies going in there. But actually we see a huge sweet spot for Indian investments coming into Sweden, and it's happening here and now, and it's going to grow in the future. So we are putting a lot of bets on India also.
But just a follow-up question to you. How much is innovation capability or capacity or level of innovation guiding you when it comes to investment promotion?
a lot, so we haven't discussed this yet, but during the past about 2 years we have been driving really like the strategic capabilities of our teams, because in the government's competitiveness strategy 2 years ago for exports and investments, it was also guiding us, saying that, okay, we need to focus more on strategically important investments. So, well, how do you know if they're important or not? So we have been doing quite thorough value chain analysis over this past 24 months, where we break up global value chains in the Swedish strongholds, look at, okay, what are investable opportunities, and actually what are also investable gaps, where can we build, investments that can strengthen our resilience and our value chains in this changing world. So we are putting a lot more analytics into the work we're doing, and I think that that's not that well known yet, and that's something where you can connect even more. So as I said in that past panel, my dream is that we connect the dots, and we can really put the best knowledge together, so we know exactly which companies are the ones that we need to have here to raise the competitiveness in Sweden.
Thank you so much. Okay, Xiejin, you can have China, I know, but also a Singaporean perspective. I think that's
sure. I think one thing I just realized while I'm sitting here, I'm sort of the other way around. Many organizations and agencies in Sweden dispatch amazing people, other countries, and then what Sweden needs to know, that's sort of we are sitting here. But I'm sort of the other way around. I mean, in South Korea I came from, and I've been working in Southeast Asia last 15 years, and I started my fieldwork on business in China 25 years ago, and I worked in foreign local enterprise, like a joint venture in China. So what actually my mission, I'm very fortunate, I'm sitting here sort of like last year and then this year, sort of getting to actually understand what Sweden is, sort of the other sort of mission I have here. So that's kind of interesting for me. So my perspective about innovation, very practical tips I can give. I think going back to large point, roller coaster in Japan and South Korea, we are used to it. This kind of roller coaster. So when you think about like a geopolitical tension, right? So there are a lot of uncertainty because of counterparts in China and then U.S. A lot of geopolitical tensions. But Asia and the region itself, there has been always this kind of a geopolitical tension. There are two different facets, in the region. There are always this kind of geopolitical tension remained, divided since, the Second World War. But since the 1990s, even like this kind of geopolitical tensions didn't hinder economic ties in Asia. So I think we should understand this kind of geopolitical tensions in the region. Asia itself, it can be very resilient. It's not so new. It has been there all the time. But when I see uncertainty, maybe many countries, we discuss, now, but I also see openness and then great opportunities, in the Asia. So Asia itself, over this uncertainty, there is excitement. There's opportunities, openness, they look for. So I think that's, one new trend that I see in Asia in terms of, innovation, in terms of international collaboration, because now they are proactively looking for different types of partners. I think that's very important point, especially in Sweden. So practical tips that maybe I can give. I just want to raise here is maybe paying attention to small, medium-sized enterprises in this region, and then paying attention to startup business. In Asia, again, like as Lars made a very great point, there are a lot of investment, a lot of efforts in government-wise, in Asia, Japan, Korea, and then different economies in Taiwan looking for proactive this kind of action, going on. So I think that's a very important point that maybe we can get what is happening, what trend is happening, in Asia.
So more broader and more proactive. That's what I hear anyway from you.
Yeah. And also on a daily basis, I always get this kind of messages in Asia, American, South Korean companies or Southeast Asian companies. Yeah. They're frustrated. They try to look for some kind of different types of partners in Sweden, but Sweden maybe generally sort of looking for more bigger established partners and big companies.
You have to find a match.
Yeah, but innovation comes, from young people.
But what about the rising star, India? What are the major trends that we should be aware of here, apart from that everything is booming upwards?
Yes, and it's good that you're saying that, because I think a lot of Swedes still think it's cows on the street, and it actually is. But at the same time, they are very, very much into the best technology. Now, but I mean, if you look at the geopolitics situation in India, I mean, they have seen a lot of pressure from the US recently, which has not been at all bad for Europe and Sweden, because that had led to the fact that we are now completing the FTA, hopefully. And I mean, the free trade agreement, of course, says a lot about trade, but it's also a framework for how you collaborate between the countries, which will easify collaboration between Sweden and India. So, I mean, looking at that, of course, I mean, we still have a lot of partnerships already today. I mean, you look at Swedish companies, we have 280 companies there who are present in the India market, but also with a lot of research and development being done in India. And we see new MOUs being signed between Swedish academia and India all the time. I mean, I have been there since August, and I signed 3 since then. So, I mean, it's really the land of opportunities from that side. But, I mean, that being said, I mean, India is very well aware of the fact that they are the 5th largest economy. They are going for the 3rd largest in only 4 years, in 2030. They know that they can set the rules in many ways, but they also want collaboration with the countries that can give them help with things that they are not so strong with, and that is innovation, I would say. So that's really a good opportunity for Sweden.
That's interesting to hear. Yeah, you have give the mic to Erik, and you have been for many years in Asia, and not least in China. So you have. I mean, I'm thinking you have seen the trends, and it would be interesting to hear. What are the last. Where are the curves heading in the region where you're headed now in terms of innovation collaboration?
Okay, so yes, I've been in China a long time, and what to many persons who have not been there seems to be a surprise that China is all of a sudden not a world-leading science nation, but the world-leading science nation, right? So, but it's actually, it's not a surprise that this is the case. But anyway, I think. In a time of big change, maybe we should ask ourselves some big questions, right? So in China, driven by geopolitics, the Chinese are now hell-bent on achieving complete self-sufficiency. Will they succeed? We don't know. But we should be aware that this project is underpinned by what is currently an extremely strong science system, right? So I think the big question I'm coming to is that we should ask ourselves, what if they succeed? What if China actually succeeds to be completely self-sufficient and not structurally dependent on technology from abroad at all? I know I mean, I'm mainly a science guy, but for companies from Sweden, so this may not come to pass, right? There are immense challenges for them to succeed, but one should never underestimate China. They did succeed pretty well with Made in China 2025, and even a partial achievement of self-sufficiency will have enormous consequences, right? So I think companies from Sweden should start thinking about or planning for a world where China and Chinese market doesn't necessarily need them, right? How to stay relevant in that situation. I don't have any answers, but it's a question to ask yourself.
Yeah, that's it. But I'm thinking also they are talking about their independency, but they will be the more independent they are, the more they will be dependent on the export to us. So it's somehow they will never be independent as long as they are the world's largest exporter, and they produce 30% of the industrial produce in the world.
Well, the expectation is to be 40-something% soon, right? But I think one thing that is already starting to happen and that will, accelerate is that Chinese companies will no longer just export, right? They will set up production abroad, right? Same as we have done, right?
So now our time is basically over. So if I could just get some kind of a 1 or 2 word answer for you for the very short question I have. You can also refrain from responding if you like. No, I mean it's hardly possible. But I was thinking about how can you recommend anything? I mean, how can we turn these insights into action? What do we need? Is it prioritization, money, people, more science counselors out there?
All of the above.
All of the above. Okay. One answer, fast.
Collaboration. That's the most Swedish answer ever, I would.
It is samverkan.
Yeah.
Hedjen, what do we need more of?
No, I like question 3 a lot here. So what attracts
short answer.
Yeah, Asian actors, innovation thing. Because how Sweden? Because for me, national branding is very important. So my perspective,
and
how Sweden is perceived to other countries, to have more
promotion,
collaboration, right? So how innovation. In Sweden.
Promotion of innovation, of Swedish innovation.
Because innovation itself in Asia can be very...
Next.
Very...
Time's up.
Pressure.
Yeah, sorry. This is like TV style,
I'll repeat myself with connecting the dots, but especially also going into not only collaboration, but sharing targets and KPIs and doing stuff together, not only talking about it.
That's a very long word, actually.
I'll build on that. Building a strategic intent with Sweden's internationalization, and then following that.
I think that was, I have just maybe one word more to say, but I think that really sums, if you ask people to be very brief, something really good normally comes out. So I think, thank you very much. Thank you, the whole panel. Just some summaries of what I think I've heard today is that I will bring with me is something that we talk about: structures, reports, sending out people, getting insights, understanding what's happening. But what I hear also between these words is people have to meet people. People have to meet people abroad, and people have to meet people here to also understand the soft material in between the reports. I'm also thinking policy needs to meet policy in these and policy needs to understand policy in these different contexts. That's also something that I seem to have heard. Also how important it is to stay curious and open. Someone also said this job has never been more important. Was that you? Maybe you said that. Thank you very much. Good, very nice words, actually. I think I will stop with that, those last words. This job has never been as important, and thank you very much for listening. I know that a lot of you have contributed over the years, not all the 80 years, but the past 10 maybe, with this both being receivers and maybe managers back home here, or being sent out in one of the countries where we have been had people sent out the last few years. It's 5:30 and it's Wednesday evening. I can't keep you any longer, so I think we will just continue the discussions over the refreshments outside. And thank you so much for joining.